Hello and welcome to this webinar called Feelings Matter about TCKs and emotional intelligence. I'm sad that we could not have this be a live recording or a live session where we could interact a little bit with one another, but I'm really glad to still be here recording this session for you, although in a non-live format, and just looking forward to diving into some of this information and having it be available. So I'll start just by introducing myself a little bit and then we can dive in. My name is Megan McCrary. I recently graduated from The Ohio State University with a master's in social work, and my focus was mental health. So my field placement, which was the practicum portion of my studies, I did at Olive Tree and was an intern there for about a year and a half. And that's how I'm connected to Olive Tree and am here doing this webinar now. Had a really great experience there. And when I graduated this past spring, I finished up my time at Olive Tree and I'm now looking toward starting a new job in about a month as a child and family therapist in North Carolina. So I'm in a bit of a transition period myself and have been much of my life. I'm also a TCK and grew up moving. I counted about 9 moves just in my life before college, and then had moves after that as well. But spent a lot of my life in transition and have worked through some of the difficulties that came with that into my adult life. And part of my passion in working with TCKs and their families is connected to my own experience as a TCK. So I hope that I know that will inform and has informed so much of my own practice. And I'm always learning new things as I encounter and work with TCKs who have their own unique experiences. So a lot of what I'm going to talk about tonight is pretty generalized, and so much depends on particular contexts and unique, the unique intersections of each individual, of each TCK. But I think that in general, emotional literacy is just such a helpful starting point for health and well-being at large. So before we start getting into some information, I'd like for everyone to just take about 10 seconds and notice how you feel. So sit down with your back straight, tall, your feet grounded on the floor, and just notice how you feel. You can notice what you're thinking, what thoughts come up. You might notice feelings in your body. And that's all. You can write it down if you'd like. You can just make a mental note of it. But I just wanted everyone to just take a moment to notice. I'm feeling, for instance, excited, nervous a little bit about getting into this material and presenting it. I'm feeling a little bit of stress as I look forward towards this move. And those are really important things for me to notice to help me understand where I'm at and where I want to be, where I want to go next, my reactions to how I'm feeling. All right. So we'll start just by talking a little bit about TCKs. I'm going to spend a short amount of time on this, but TCKs are a definition that many people use are people who spend a significant portion of their childhood outside of their passport country. This can look a lot of different things depending on the particular type of TCK. Um, but something that I think is common amongst most TCKs are the layered stressors. So I have here a couple of different ones. You have frequently changing environments, so moving um, sometimes across country, sometimes just apartments or schools based on things that might be happening in terms of your parents' work. So there's often frequently changing environments around a TCK's life. They're they're navigating those environments throughout multiple cultures. So on top of this, there's a layer of what language am I speaking where, what kinds of norms would be appropriate in this culture versus another one. There's family culture on top of this. So they're navigating already now two layers. Another layer will be the developmental stage that they're at. So they're going to be navigating all of those things as a brain that is in the process of developing. So for adults, while these moves are also stressful, their brains are relatively developed. They're sort of set and grounded and somewhat rooted, and often have gone through that process in a rooted environment. So TCKs are developing, their brains are developing as all of these things are happening. There's increased pressure and expectations for TCKs to transition well because they're used to it, or because there's labels or personality traits sort of projected onto TCKs to be able to sort of be strong and resilient, and those are wonderful things, but it's not always the case that it's an easy transition, or that things happen smoothly. There's bound to be stressors here, and on top of this, they're navigating grief, and so what I want to focus on is stress being a normal and a healthy reaction to all of these layers of change. That stress isn't something that equals unhealth or equals bad, but that it's something that is really, really normal, especially when all of this is happening at the same time for someone. And that stress can really be a helpful signal for us in terms of what it is that we need. How can we find health? And how can we nourish health in a space where stress is signaling really healthy signals of this isn't going to work, or this isn't working right now, or this is too hard. It's really important to notice those things and to then be able to respond to them. So I think that it's really helpful to use this framework when we're thinking about not only stress, but really any feelings that we're having. So we'll get more into that in a little bit. But let's quickly talk about the definition of emotional intelligence and some of the core tenets. So emotional intelligence is the ability to recognize and to understand emotions in yourself and in others, and to use this awareness to influence how we behave in the world, how we act, and how that behavior and those actions affect our relationships. Our emotions are natural and healthy, and they're things that just happen really without us thinking about them. Our emotions and our cognition, our ways of thinking, they happen separately, but they also happen together. And so often, especially in Western culture, and this really dates back for a long time, but our emotions have often been seen as being in contrast with our cognition, and that they're oppositional forces, that our emotions and our thinking are separate, they're different, they're oppositional, they're in conflict. and that we should think our way out of these negative feelings that we're having. But when we change our framework to emotions being natural, there being things that come, whether we think about them coming or not, or whether we think about stopping them from coming or not, they'll still come. And that they're not necessarily, in and of themselves, good or bad. They just are. And what they do is they give us really helpful information on our current state, on how we are processing and handling and navigating the world around us. So instead of these cognition and emotion being opposing forces, they're really interactive forces. And there's so much research that, especially recent research, that has been supporting the idea that emotional literacy or emotional intelligence reaps so many benefits beyond just being able to name your feeling and to manage your feeling well. So I think it's interesting to look at the ripple effect of being able to name how we feel, and to understand that it has, benefits that go far beyond just feeling in and of itself. So it's not necessarily about, mastering emotional intelligence so that we can be really creative and have great memory and up our positive relationships and get better grades. Instead, it's really about thinking about ourselves more holistically, and how everything going on with us in our bodies and our minds and our spirits, they're so interconnected. And the more health we can bring to any aspect will affect all of the other ones as well. And so these benefits aren't necessarily things I put here to act as like things to achieve, so much as just the natural ripple effect of what happens when we really learn how to notice how we feel, how to give words to how we feel, and then how to respond or react based on how we feel. All right, so really one of the main goals here, as I've already been talking about, is the importance of recognizing. And the reason that we're recognizing is to regulate. So this is sort of just a little snippet of, or like the ideas of emotional intelligence in a nutshell, is recognizing how we're feeling in order to regulate how we're feeling. But in order to recognize how we're feeling, it's important to have a vocabulary. If we don't have the words to put to how we feel, then it becomes really, really difficult to recognize how we feel. And so this is something that I think I myself as an adult am learning how to recognize how I feel, but also am learning new words for feelings, often feelings and experiences. And the more that I can increase that literacy, the more I'm able to recognize and then able to regulate. And so as parents of TCKs, this is something to practice and to model both with your children and for yourself, which your children will then see you modeling. So behavior is really just a form of communication. And oftentimes children, because their brains are developing and they're not just little mini adults who understand always how we're processing the world, if we just, try to fit it in the right way, they are developing in their own, at their own pace and in their own ways. And so understanding as an adult that our children's behavior is really just them communicating something. And if they're feeling something really big, like let's say they're feeling really, really mad about something, well, they may, if they don't have the language, or you haven't been able to work on building up that vocabulary, their actions or their behavior isn't necessarily getting back at you or being difficult or whatever it is that can feel so real and frustrating in that moment. But really, it's just a form of trying to communicate feeling. And so, with any developmental age, this is true. With adults, this can be true, and learning how to help recognize and regulate and build up that literacy is a really helpful way of addressing behavior that can be frustrating or difficult. And for TCKs in particular, because of those layered types of stress going on for them, it's really, really extra helpful to have words to put to how you're feeling in order to communicate. So Wittgenstein is a German philosopher from the 30s and 40s. And he said, "The limits of my language mean the limits of my world." So think about the vastness of human emotion and experience. Brene Brown talks about this in her most recent book, Atlas of the Heart. A lot of times we use 3 to maybe 6 feeling words: angry, sad, happy. I'm trying to think of some of the other most common ones that we use. And that ends up being sort of the extent of our feeling vocabulary. However, when we're able to expand our language, it gives us a portal or a window into our worlds, which gives us insight into ourselves, but it also gives other people insight into ourselves, and within a family that can be really helpful. So emotional literacy is essentially a key. I like to think of it as a key to meaning making, to connection, and to healing. Our ability to speak how we feel is opening up a world inside of you, and it can be a bridge for someone else to be able to communicate and to develop and build relationship with you. In order to move through a feeling, we must first name it. Brene Brown says that language shows us that naming an experience doesn't give the experience more power. Instead, it gives us the power of understanding and meaning. So sometimes feelings can be really scary, and we don't really want to build our emotional literacy because sometimes it feels like it gives that feeling more power. And so we'll instead avoid or stuff it in, not tell anybody. Maybe there's shame connected to it or fear. But research has shown that the opposite is actually true, that being able to name how we feel, even if it's a feeling that has a lot of taboo around it or that feels really scary, that it actually gives us the power because it allows us to understand where we are and to make meaning out of it. So we're going to start talking a little bit about Ruler, which is an evidence-based approach created by Mark Brackett through the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence. And it's an approach to social and emotional learning. So Ruler is a specific tool, and the tool was created particularly for schools. So it supports schools in emotional intelligence and in all of these things that I've been talking about and we'll talk about. This is focused within a curriculum. But what I want to do is teach you some of the tenets and the tools within Ruler to use at home. And I think that especially for TCKs who are moving around a lot and might not have a steady school environment to be in where they might access this type of a curriculum. This can be a really helpful thing to bring emotional intelligence into your home and family. So ruler is an acronym, and we're just going to go through each letter briefly. So these are the 5 skills of emotional intelligence according to Mark Brackett's research. R, recognizing emotions in oneself and others. So a question, a simple question to sum up the first R would be, how do you feel? Recognizing the feeling. How do you feel? The U stands for understand. Understand the causes and the consequences of your feelings. So a simple question might be, what caused you to feel this way? The L stands for labeling emotions with a nuanced vocabulary. Another idea or another way to word this would be, what word best describes how you're feeling? Then expressing your emotion. How are you showing this feeling to the world? Is the way that you're experiencing your feeling helpful for you in the situation that you're in? And then R, the last R, stands for regulating your emotion and doing so with helpful strategies. What strategy will you use to feel more, less, or the same of what you are currently feeling? So you can use this acronym as sort of a step-by-step tool to interact with any feeling that you have or any experience that you have. So one of the big basic tenets of this concept is what I think is a really big paradigm shift between seeing emotions as good and bad versus seeing them as neutral, helpful information. So an emotion judge and an emotion scientist are, I think, a helpful metaphor for this, and something that I have used in my own life quite a bit in shifting my paradigm or shifting my framework. So an emotion judge tends to be critical, closed, ignores feelings or avoids them, sees them as right or wrong, good or bad, and generally is in what Mark Brackett has called knower mode, with a fixed mindset. So there's not a lot of openness or curiosity, sort of like the idea of a judge. It's black and white, good or bad. An emotion scientist, however, is open and curious and reflective, and they see every emotion, all of the feelings that are coming in, as information. That idea of learner mode and wanting to get sort of like the microscope that you see in the slide here, wanting to get very granular with your feelings and to be really nuanced in, am I feeling mad or am I feeling disappointed? Am I feeling afraid or am I feeling anxious or am I feeling excited? What are some of the specifics of how I'm feeling? And not only getting granular, but also not judging the feeling. So, okay, so I'm not feeling mad, I'm feeling disappointed. Interesting. Not, I shouldn't feel disappointed, or I'm too old to feel disappointed about that. That's a silly thing to feel disappointed about. That would be the language of an emotion judge. But an emotion scientist can say, interesting. I'm feeling disappointed. What might that be saying? What is that pointing to? Is it pointing to a longing we might have? How do I want to act in response to that feeling? So being able to really shift the paradigm from emotion judge to emotion scientist is a key shift, is a key framework for moving forward with a lot of these tools. Susan David, who is a Harvard Medical School psychologist, has her own research on what she calls emotional agility. We won't spend a lot of time on this slide, but I just wanted to show you her take on what is a really similar idea of an emotion judge versus an emotion scientist. She calls it fighting versus feeling. And this is just another helpful way to think about that same idea, but using some different language. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the tools that Mark Brackett and his team at Yale have developed for schools and how you might be able to use those for a family. Mood meter is the first tool we're going to look at. And the mood meter enhances self and social awareness by supporting a wide range of emotion vocabulary. We'll take a look here at the mood meter. So here's one iteration of the mood meter. You can see going up and down is energy. And usually there is like a 5 points up, 5 points down, and the middle would be 0. So right in between sort of the purple and red and the blue and yellow would be the 0 mark. Basically along the X and Y axis would be the 0 mark, and then going into negative would be -5 and into positive +5. But this basically gives us the visual aid in being an emotion scientist and looking really granular and finding nuanced words for how we're feeling. So let's say that you have really high energy and are feeling really, really good, really positive in terms of pleasantness. You might feel ecstatic. You are just so energized. You might feel really motivated. Let's say that your pleasantness is still really, really far over on the positive, but your energy level's lower. Serene, peaceful. If you're feeling low energy, low pleasantness, despair, exhausted, sad, and your energy goes up, but your pleasantness is still low, you might be really angry. So you can see that there are lots of different words and different spaces within that graph that you might fall. And it expands, it really helps expand vocabulary. So the mood meter is a helpful tool for the first R in ruler, to recognize. This is a simple way to recognize what it is that we're feeling. So this is another example of a mood meter. And one idea might be for you to make a mood meter at home with your children or with your partner or by yourself. Make your own mood meter. And this can be a really helpful thing to look at the beginning of the day, after school, at the end of the day, and just practice recognizing where you might be on the mood meter. And what I've written on the sides here, along the sides of this mood meter, are just some helpful ways to think about, again, like the emotion scientist, how feelings aren't good or bad. They're information, and that information gives us the agency and gives us sort of the control over what is it that we're going to do with this feeling. So when we're in that high energy, low pleasantness, angry space, it could be actually not necessarily bad, although we might be used to defining it as bad. But it could be a helpful space to take action, to debate, which can be a healthy thing to do, to get energy out, maybe to go for a run. So it's not the feeling that is bad, but what we do with the feeling, the behavior. If we're feeling despair, that's another one that we might say, oh, that is bad. I do not want to feel that way. But if we have an emotion scientist lens, we might see it as an opportunity to self-reflect, to expand our empathy or compassion for others who might be suffering. So what we do with the feelings um, is what matters, and the feeling itself um, is really, really helpful in our decision for what we're going to do with that feeling. Charter is the second tool we're going to look at. This is sort of like a roadmap or yeah, I like to think of it as a map mostly of a way to um, agree upon together, or sometimes individually, for how you'd like to feel and how you can help each other experience those feelings, or help yourself experience that feeling. So it's sort of like a value map, actually. And these are some examples from classrooms. So a classroom at the beginning of the year might get together and say, this is how we want to feel as a class. We want to feel safe. We want to feel respected. We want to feel happy. Um, and then they put those values down on paper. They sign their names, and they're able to together return to this when other feelings come up and when they have to navigate those other feelings. So as a family, you could create your own charter by asking yourselves, how do we want to feel as a family? How can we help one another feel this way? And when we encounter unwanted feelings or conflict, what will we do? So it's not about saying you're not allowed to feel, or you're not allowed to be angry in this house, so much as when that feeling comes up, when you feel angry, what is it that we'll do? And how does our decision about what we do align with our values? So it's a little bit more of an interconnected approach to how we're feeling. So you could create one of these together as a family. You could write it down on a piece of paper, or sort of like these classrooms, have a theme to your charter. You could do it by yourself in a notebook, just for your individual sort of self charter. And that can be just a helpful thing to return to when you have these feelings come up that you don't know what to do with. How does what I do then align with my value? How can I respond accordingly? All right, so the third tool is the meta moment. And a meta moment is essentially a coping mechanism, or providing a space for a coping mechanism and strategies that are healthy and that align with the charter, align with those values. Viktor Frankl is an Austrian psychiatrist, also a Holocaust survivor. And he said, between stimulus and response, there's a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom. I love this quote. And I love the idea of there being space, of opening up, stretching out space between something that happens and our response to that thing. Sometimes, often, I would say, I forget about that space. Something happens, everything's happening in the day. It feels like I'm moving about my day. Maybe it's a really busy day and there's a lot going on, and there feels like there's zero space. But if we can, like a scientist, get granular, look really close, notice where there are actually spaces, and then how we want to use that space, to think about how we feel, to notice how we feel, and to choose how we respond. Again, though, choosing how we respond necessitates knowing how we feel. But this particular tool is about that space. So a time in, which is a phrase that I'm borrowing from Dan Siegel, is a helpful way to think about a meta moment. So instead of a classic sort of time out, or, this behavior was bad, so you have a timeout, a space away, thinking more about, okay, instead of necessarily just focusing on the behavior, what is the behavior communicating? Noticing how you feel, and taking a time in, which gives you space to promote co-regulation with your child, as well as then self-regulation, both for yourself and modeled then for your child to learn how to regulate themselves over time away from you. But learning to do it together is a really helpful starting place, especially for younger kids. So identifying the trigger would be the first step of this meta moment. What caused me to feel this way? And that's the E, the U of ruler, is understand what caused it. So identify the trigger. Sense the changes. Notice what is changing in my body. Am I feeling really tense? Are my muscles getting really tight? What is this trigger causing? Pause, take the space, reflect on how you want to respond, and then choose the strategy. And you can then apply your strategy to the external circumstance or the thing that maybe caused that feeling to begin with. So this is something that you can also put out as steps, like on your fridge or on a mirror, to remember how to take the time to have a meta moment and to take space, to give yourself space to choose how you'd like to respond to a feeling. And then the fourth and final tool is called a blueprint. And a blueprint supports the development of empathy and helps build conflict resolution skills. And this can be a really helpful way to manage, especially conflicts, or when you have a feeling that is connected to relationships, it can be something that's helpful to practice by yourself. So this is a bit of a complicated slide. But what I wanted to show at the top with past, present, and future is that you can use this tool in any of these times. You can use it in a reflective way, looking at the past. You can use it in a present sense, or looking toward maybe a difficult conversation you have to have, or tomorrow is going to be a hard day because of a test. So you can use this blueprint or this template in any of these, looking back, forward, or presently. And you can do it from two perspectives or both. So you might focus on your own perspective. How do you feel? What is causing that feeling? How do you express that feeling, or how will you express that feeling? How did you express that feeling? How might your actions have affected others? Looking back, reflecting. Or how might that action affect others tomorrow? Looking forward. What can I do now? And then you can ask similar questions, but from the other's perspective, which this then promotes empathy. This can be really helpful if your child comes home from a hard day of school, looking from a past perspective. Like I said earlier, if there's a difficult day coming up, you can use it from a future perspective. Or perhaps, your child and a friend, or your two children are having a conflict, you can use this actively and immediately in that moment, and even do it together. So this is a really helpful tool as well that is used when schools use this curriculum. They use it, but can be used at home and be incredibly helpful. So now that we've looked at the tenets of emotional intelligence and some tools, I want to focus briefly on developmental stages. What's going on in some different developmental stages for your child, and what are ways to foster daily practices to integrate emotional intelligence in your day-to-day life. So infancy, ages 0 to 1, babies are already starting to notice emotions. They're noticing their own emotions, maybe not in a way that you and I do, but they're noticing them. And they're noticing the emotions of the people around them, especially their primary caregivers. So what's happening is they're noticing how different stimuli make them feel, being hungry, eating, going to the bathroom. How are these things affecting how they feel? And they're establishing trust with their caregivers and with the whole world around them. They're figuring out what's safe, what's not, and how they feel gives them a lot of clues into this sort of intuitive trust building stage. So engaging by attuning, which is being aware and receptive to your child, establishing a safe, connected relationship. Encourage self-soothing. So anything that they're doing that is helping them sort of calm down is a good thing. That's a self-soothing mechanism. So encourage that. Show your own emotion. You might not think that they notice it, and maybe they're not noticing it in the exact same ways we would, but just beginning to model showing your feeling and model how you respond to those big feelings is something that the baby's picking up on in that early year. From ages about 2 to 3, children are learning and practicing to express their feelings. So they're developing vocabulary, and this is something that you can do to engage with them, is help them develop that vocabulary. They're developing some independence and autonomy from you as they're able to walk a little bit and be a little bit more separated. And they're experimenting with responses and reactions to feelings, their own responses and your responses, the people around them's responses. So they're expressing. So engaging your child by remaining calm, especially when your child's not calm, which I know is a very difficult thing to do, but practicing your own self-regulation strategies is a really helpful way to do this. To direct with clarity, with kindness, and also with firmness. And really importantly is to validate all feelings. And this is building that emotion scientist perspective, that feelings aren't good or bad. They are feelings, and they're valid and they're normal. So this starts now, it continues throughout many stages of development. But in order for a child to know and trust that an emotion is manageable, they must know that it's normal, that they're not the only ones who feel this way, or that it's not as scary as it might feel in that moment. So perhaps your child is coloring and they get really frustrated. It might be, to you, it might seem silly, or you might want to say, don't get frustrated about something so small. It's just coloring, or something like that. But it actually is really important to validate that feeling. That is frustrating. I might be frustrated too, or I can see that you're frustrated. Yeah, that is a frustrating thing. So validating that feeling builds a healthy response to feelings in general, and it allows a child to know, okay, this is manageable. I feel this way. What am I going to do about it? And that's where you can really teach responses, healthy responses. And then building language. So starting with a really simple emotions chart can be a helpful way to start building that language with your child ages 2 to 3. Ages 3 to 6 are moving into learning more in depth how to manage emotions. And they're dealing with increased social interactions, perhaps starting school, having more time with peers. They're capable of initiating activities and asserting their own control and autonomy a little bit more. And empathy is beginning to emerge in a bigger way because they're interacting more with other people, with other children. So engaging your child in this stage, one strategy or tool that's especially helpful in this stage is the meta moment. So as they're with peers and they're figuring out how to manage their feelings, giving them a meta moment, or the tool to understand what a meta moment is really helpful. So learning how to say, okay, I feel this way. What am I going to do about it? How can I take that space to choose my response? demonstrating and modeling this with your kids as it's happening in your family relationships is really helpful. And avoid fixing hard emotions. So if there's a really hard emotion that comes up, instead of trying to fix it, being curious about it with your child. What is it that you're feeling? I wonder what caused this feeling. I wonder what this feeling is telling us about what to do next. And allow your child to begin to explore the ripple effects of their choices and how they respond to their feelings. All right, the elementary years, increased social awareness. So increased awareness of other people's feelings as well as your own feeling. There's a lot of eagerness in this stage to learn new skills. There's also higher comparing with other people, and sometimes self-esteem and goal achievement begins to emerge because of that comparison that can happen within those elementary years. So supporting your child by engaging in emotionally healthy ways to navigate peer relationships. And the self-reflection and empathy that gets built using the blueprint of looking at, and the blueprint was a tool we had looked at before. It helps us look at how are we feeling? What are we doing about it? How might that affect someone else? What are they feeling? What did they do? How did that make me feel? And using that to help your child in this new sort of vast social sea that they're in. And then one other helpful tool I wanted to share with you is called flipping your lid. It's this hand brain model. So if this is a model of your brain, this top part is your prefrontal cortex, and the thumb is your amygdala. And your amygdala is where you have sort of that fight flight response. It's really, so we're processing our emotions in the limbic system, which is sort of in between. But the amygdala is where the prefrontal cortex gets sort of disengaged, and we are in a fight, flight, freeze response. And we're not really thinking. So our prefrontal cortex is where we're doing more advanced thinking and connecting of information and planning on what we want to do, how we might want to navigate or choose to respond to a feeling. That might happen all in the prefrontal cortex. However, when we get so riled up or triggered, or something happens where we no longer can sort of think straight, which we've all experienced this feeling, we flip our lid and the amygdala takes charge. When this happens, it's very difficult to have a child engage in, for instance, self-reflection or the blueprint model of looking at how you felt and talking about it in deep ways. This is offline. The thinking brain is offline. So when this happens, and this is a helpful model, we can just notice it. Okay, we flipped our lid, the amygdala is taking charge. And what can be really helpful here to bring this back and to reintegrate cognition and feeling and the prefrontal cortex with the limbic system, with the amygdala, are regulation strategies, coping strategies that calm the body. So breathing exercises, moving your body, stretching, going for a walk, not necessarily talking. Talking can come later, but doing something that brings you back to the present, that makes you feel safe. Maybe, if, depending on the context, holding or hugging your child, reestablishing that we're not in fight flight, we're not unsafe. Our brain doesn't need to be here right now, even though it feels like we're unsafe. We're not. Reminding ourselves through our body, through touch, through movement, that we are safe, re-engaging the prefrontal cortex, and then discussing it. And the meta moment is a really helpful tool for, maybe we can't talk through it in the way that we have in this webinar, but the meta moment gives us at least the ability to say, okay, we are, we flipped our lid, and um, this is the tool that we need. The strategy becomes deep breaths, or um, being together, going on a walk together, doing something where we can calm down and regroup. Okay. Middle school years, increased self-awareness. So identity is developing. There's profound changes in the brain. There's a remodeling of the brain that's happening that I'm going to discuss a little bit more in the high school section. Newfound independence, and a really high value in peer relationships. So a really helpful way to engage your children in this developmental stage is by focusing on self-regulation for yourself. And this can help avoid power control reactions between you and your child. And modeling, by doing so, you're modeling self-regulation for your child as well. Talk about feelings, talk about how you're feeling, normalize talking about feelings, which starts really early and continues, but keep up that normalizing of how are we feeling, how are you feeling, making a more complex mood meter together, or putting one on your fridge that you have maybe a magnet you can put on how you're feeling. So continuing to really notice and validate feelings, respecting needs for alone time as a helpful way that your middle schooler can self-regulate, and practice what Dan Siegel calls mindsight, which I'm going to go ahead and move into high school. But mindsight is a helpful way to think about how you're thinking, and to think about how other people might be thinking. And this is connected to what's happening in the teenage brain. So the teenage brain is incredible. A lot is going on in it. And two of the big things that are happening are myelin formation and pruning. So in the pruning period of the teenage brain, middle school and high school both, your child's brain is pruning from this generalist, like children are learning everything they can about all of the things that are put in front of them. And high schoolers or teenagers, middle schoolers are beginning to prune. Their brain doesn't need all of that information. And in fact, it begins to specialize. They might be really passionate about a particular thing. And so this is a really cool phase, actually. It might seem like, oh, suddenly they don't care about anything anymore, but really there's a pruning process happening. So really encouraging your child, empowering your child to follow those passions and to find what it is that they really love, and encourage them in that. The other thing that's happening is myelin formation, which is a sheath that around the brain that allows neurons to communicate much more effectively and quickly than they were before in childhood. So abstract thinking begins during this time because of this myelin formation. And this not only allows for a more abstract way of thinking, but this also increases a child's ability to integrate different parts of their experiences together, and to increase empathy. And that's what mindsight was in the last slide, is just being able to increase connectedness, empathy, understanding of other people. And that's a really beautiful, amazing thing that's happening during this time. So you can engage by discussing values, supporting your child's or your teen's sense of self, allowing them to make decisions in line with their own values. So helping them create their own charter, or encouraging them to create their own charter, that their values might look a little bit different from what the family's values have been thus far. And how their decisions, helping them understand how their decisions should be linked to those values, and helps them understand the ripple effect of how they're choosing to respond to how they're feeling. And then encourage this growth and this exciting time. Dan Siegel says, our job is to walk with our children through their difficult moments with connection and empathy, allowing them to feel, to be an active participant in problem solving, and to discover the depth of their own capacity. So this goes really throughout every developmental stage, is just walking with our children through their own exploring of how they feel, what they choose to do with how they feel, and helping them just understand their own amazing potential. All right, so to summarize, implementing and integrating everything that we've talked about, this is sort of a short list of ways that you can engage both with yourself and with your child to support emotional intelligence. This list is going to be provided at the end as well, linked as a resource. So don't feel the need to write everything down right away. But just paying attention, feeling your feelings, talking about your feelings, listening, being curious. These are all things we've talked about as those tenets of emotional intelligence. Showing empathy, responding wisely, understanding that there's more than one perspective at play, staying connected, having the courage to repair when things don't go as planned, and always remembering kindness. If we can implement those values into our homes, we nourish and foster wholehearted, thoughtful, creative, courageous, and compassionate TCKs. So I really encourage you to get curious, to practice with yourself and with your family, noticing how you feel, expanding your emotion vocabulary, and seeing what happens. You might be surprised. All right, these are some linked resources that you will find on this recordings page, webpage. There are a few feelings lists, emotion lists that can be helpful. There's a needs inventory that is another helpful sort of underlayer to how we're feeling. So what needs might be underneath those feelings? And then there's also the ruler parent tips, which I've summarized on a previous page and are going to be there for you as well. It has been such a pleasure to spend this webinar sharing some of this information with you that I find really fascinating and really helpful, and that I am humbled by all the time in my own personal life, in my own practice. And again, encourage you to try or to continue doing if it's already a part of your own practice. Thank you so much.